Hi, I'm Paul Batis with GreatDad.com, and I'm excited to have another conversation in my weekly series talking to dads who've done a lot of thinking about this. And I want to welcome Ken Gordon, who has a really exciting resume, which I'm sure he'll bring into the conversation. Ken went to the Citadel Military College in South Carolina. He's a pastor. He's developed he had a church in New Jersey. He's got a church in Charlotte. He does international viewings of his services, and he's an engaged father. And I'm excited to have you on the show, Ken.
Thank you. It's great to be on the show as well.
Yeah, well, and you can find Ken at dadsoffaith.com. And I don't know how much of the faith part we're going to get into, though. I totally love some of the statements you've made about following the teaching of Jesus. I'm not really a big believer myself, but I do believe in a lot of what Jesus said. And so I think you and I are very much in sync in that regard. But
Absolutely.
we want to talk about one of the subjects that you are passionate about, which is this idea of being a present father versus an engaged father. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you mean by the difference? They sound very much alike.
Yeah, and first of all, thanks so much for being on your show, and I appreciate being here with you and with all of your listeners and viewers, etc. It's funny, they may sound alike, but they are so different. They couldn't be more different. The present dad is the dad who is just a warm body in the house. The present dad is the dad who knows he has children, and engaged dad is the dad who knows his children.
Right.
And so, when I think about a present versus an engaged dad, I'm thinking about that man who turns off the television, puts down the remote, turns off his cell phone, puts down the tablet, puts down the gaming device, and just and turns total and focused attention on his legacy, his children, and who knows them, who understands them, who knows their friends, who knows who they are and what makes them tick, who actually plays with them, who engages with them. And so I truly believe that as men, we have an obligation as early as our children are born of knowing them, of being engaged with them. And I think too often we think that going out and having a job and bringing home the bacon, if you will, is engagement. It's not. One of the things I talk a lot about the fact that engaged dad, these are the dads on a regular basis that really take the time to really know their families and spend time. And I think time is probably the issue here between a present dad and an engaged dad. An engaged dad, he invests time.
I talk to people all the time about this, and the time thing is so crucial. And far be it for me to judge somebody who's got to work two jobs a week or two jobs a day and has less than 8 hours to himself at all day long. Some people are living really hard lives out
Sure.
there. I don't want to judge people who don't even have any time for themselves, but a lot of us do. We do make conscious choices. You can go out and play. You can play golf for 6-8 hours in an afternoon, or spend the evening playing video games or watching TV. Those are conscious choices that you make. And if you think that your kids aren't aware of it, or that you aren't missing out because you need some me time, you're probably making an error.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and that was an actual physical shift in my life when I figured that part out. I remember my children were fairly young, and I was in the gym all the time. I was lifting, and I was getting cut and buff and the six pack and everything, and and I was preening and strutting around with this amazing body. And I remember that their mother said to me one day, she said, maybe if you would just spend a little bit more time with the children and take less time at the gym, then maybe you can get to know your kids. Wow. And when she said it to me, she didn't say it to me actually in a way she wasn't critiquing me really. It was actually just kind of in a conversation, when I think I actually, kind of initiated it by saying something to the effect of, the children and what they were doing or something. And she just made it kind of a statement in passing. And she didn't understand how the effect it had on me. And in that moment, I said, I have a choice to make. I have 2 young children. I can either be this super buff, vain guy, or I can spend less time in the gym, which is not to say you don't spend any time, but certainly less time in the gym and more time with them. And I opted for them over the gym.
Yeah.
And and I tell everybody now, when you look at my belly, just know that
Where
was
your
an
priorities
investment
lie.
in my children.
Yeah, you're wearing it as a badge of honor.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, we do miss out. We do miss out on those things when we're taking care of ourselves. And I know
Yeah.
there's a lot of feeling. I read about this all the time. Like, you got to take care of yourself first. And yeah, you do to some degree. But
Right.
like you say, there's so many things. Are there ways you can kind of test yourself? I mean, I know people who test themselves. Like, do you know the name of your kids' top two friends, or you know the name of their teacher, or do you know what they studied in school today? There are all these things that you can kind of ask yourself, and if you don't know, maybe it's time to get more engaged.
Yeah, and I think that's good. And I think for everybody it's something a little bit different. I think that you should develop a test, and you should test yourself on a regular basis. And for some people it might be knowing your children's two best friends. For some people it might be knowing your children's favorite songs. For some people it might be knowing their favorite television shows. Or for some people it may be knowing their favorite Instagram or TikTok or or whatever character or person. The world is changing so quickly, but all of us should do something to test ourselves. And then I think another thing is asking yourselves, what are you doing to accommodate your children's likes and desires in your life? And I'll give you an example. I remember after I got divorced, I said to my children, we got in the car one day, and I turned to them and I said, "What radio station do you want to listen to?" And it was a conscious effort on my part to try to let my children know that I want a relationship with you, so I'm willing to accommodate.
Right.
So many times you get in the car and the driver owns the radio, but just a little thing like that was such a major thing to my children. I mean, they're in their 20s now and they still talk about it. And I think you
Wow.
have to find those things in your life that allows you to say to your children, "Hey, I want to get to know you. I want to be engaged in your life, to really know who you are, what you like, what you don't like, what matters to you, what doesn't matter to you." And even to the point, which was painful for me from an ego standpoint, but from the standpoint of understanding whether or not my children even wanted to go to college.
Yeah.
I have two PhDs. I have a master's. I have my undergrad, my bachelor's degree. I'm always learning, always trying to to go
Yeah.
back to school, if you will. And when my son said to me, "Yeah, Dad, college is just not for me," I was just like, "Oh my God, whose son is this?"
Wow.
Right. But when I learned that I had to get to know him for who he was, not for who I was trying to make him, and I had to engage with him to really understand who he was, it was a lesson for me in a really big way.
Wow, that is really an interesting story, because I shared a little bit that I'm working on this course about starting with the end in mind and developing values in your children, with the hope that they will take those values and incorporate them and become that type of person. I mean, in this case, I'm sure education was a huge value as you went along,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting how it turned out, where your son decided that there was a different path that's not top value, or not, maybe not education in the traditional way. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I mean, can we go a little bit deeper on that, about how
Yeah. Yeah. So
that was a value for you and it didn't work out?
so I insisted. I mean, I'm a former Marine, and I said, "No, you don't tell me what you're not going to do. You're going to college." And he did. He went to college, and in his first semester he failed every single course.
Okay.
And when he brought the grades to me proudly and defiantly, he said, "I told you, this is not for
Well,
me."
that was an easy one to do.
Yeah, but I understood in that moment that he literally did not even try,
Right.
because he just, in his mind, he felt like, and it's a different generation now, right? The generation I came up in, if my parents said you're going to college, then the only thing that was going to stop me would be finances.
Yeah.
And if we could figure out finances, then it was a done deal. But I find with this generation, and generation that we're dealing with, and right now, whether it's the millennials or the Gen Zs or the Gen As, there's an independence that they have, and a refusal to be instructed or dictated to. And so we as parents, we have to embrace that. We have to own that, and we have to determine, how then do I parent in the midst of a changing dynamic world? Those of us who insist upon parenting the way we were parented, we're not going to be engaged.
Yeah.
Those of us who insist on forcing our children to be a mini me, we're not going to be engaged. So when my son said that to me, my initial response, my knee-jerk response, was to force it upon him.
Right.
He got the last laugh. And when he came back to me, it was a huge sign to me that I needed to adjust my approach, because my son was not who I was going to force him to be. And so we sat down and I said, okay, so what is it that you want to do? Who are you? And shame on me for not having been engaged enough in that moment, or prior to that moment, to really know. And he said to me, his whole premise for not wanting to go to college was really all about his own personal feelings about his intelligence and his capability to do college. And while I could give him a rah-rah speech all day long, that wasn't going to overcome where he was. And so it forced me to really, instead of dictating to him, to really sit down and better understand him. And as I better understood him, what I understood about my son is very tactile, right? And everything that he likes, doing things with his hands. So right now, my son's a mechanic and he loves it and he's happy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, it's what he enjoys doing. And when he's not doing that, he's a photographer and he goes out and takes, he does pictures of cars and pictures of illegal drag racing and
So he sounds like, though, he probably integrated other values you had, like
yeah,
hard work and resilience,
and
solution
even
finding,
education, but education in his way.
normal sense, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He doesn't attach a value to a piece of paper that says, you've been here with us 4 years now, now we're okay with you. He for his education and the way he learns is with his hands, and in ways that he can directly connect an outcome. If I learn this about how to tear down a transmission, then that means I'm going to be able to do this. And it's a direct one-to-one correlation. And I had to learn that.
Yeah. Well, I really respect you for being willing to say that, even though we're kind of both trying to position ourselves as experts on fatherhood, but we make errors like this all the time. And you can make an error like that, obviously, for 18 years straight, and still,
Sure.
you try your best, and you still, I don't know, maybe it's because of the way we set up our structures in our own mind, and we've got kind of blinders on. This is the way to do it. You finish high school, you go on to college, and
Right.
we don't even imagine for our kids, because we were well educated, that they are
Right.
going to deviate from that. And so it's a complete blind spot, right?
Yeah. Paul, but I want to share something with you. You just said, and I just want to be really clear about it. One of the things I've written at this point, I have 5 books that have been published. 4 of the 5 books are something directly surrounding fatherhood. And I tell people that I'm not an expert in fatherhood. I've just failed so much until I want other people to learn from my failure.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have been fortunate enough to fail forward, and having done that, I can share with other people some of the things that I learned in that. Because if you don't learn every time you fail, then failure means nothing.
Exactly.
But inside of every failure is an amazing educational lesson. And I've been fortunate enough to put myself, I have a failure PhD where I've been fortunate enough to fail, but recognize each and every time what I can do better and differently.
Yeah. I'd say there are some platitudes around fatherhood, like the one I say a billion times is the days are long and the years are short. But I try not to get too preachy about what to do exactly in what situations. God knows. Anything could happen with the best of intentions.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say to you, going back to your original question, is when that happened with my son and with me, one of the things that happened is, and it was actually from both my son and my daughter, things happened in both of their lives that just really kind of threw me for a loop because they weren't according to the chart the path that I charted for them. But I found this book, and I don't recall the author right now, but I found this book, and the name of the book was something like, when your grown kids disappoint you, you know,
Mhm.
because I love to read, and I'm always out looking for ways to expand my mind and to read more, etc. And I was just like, okay, I'm looking for this book. Like, how do I get better in this? How do I learn from this? How do I become better? And so, I found this book and I read the book, and it really helped me with perspective, right? And the biggest thing that I've learned, as an engaged dad, as someone who is, an author who has written books and been privileged enough to talk to a number of different people who have read the books, the thing that I've learned is that none of us have all the answers, and that the only way that we really figure this thing out is doing it together. And so there are things that I will learn about fatherhood from other men, and hopefully things that they'll learn about me. But at the end of the day, I just always stay open, always willing to learn.
Yeah. There's something in there also that you just said too, is about the fact that in our human relationships, they aren't always this binary thing of
Yeah.
pure love that is almost, religious in its adoration of a child. We, with our spouses, with our friends, there are always ups and downs, negatives and positives, times when you say, I don't even know if I like you or
Sure.
not. And
Sure.
with our kids is the same way. And I guess that would be maybe interesting to talk about a little bit about the guilt that sometimes comes to fathers when they don't, the kid, like when your kids disappoint you, like, can I feel a little ambivalent about that, or can I feel a little disappointed? Is that okay, or am I supposed to just say, they're my kids? I mean, obviously we love them to death, but it's more complicated than just unconditional, right?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And it's more realistic too.
Right.
One of the days when I had one of the times when I had an amazing breakthrough in my fatherhood journey was the day when I made an admission that I didn't like my children. And that sounds really horrible, but there are times when your children will disappoint you, or will disrespect you, or will just go in such a different direction from where you are and what you want, and in a way that just disregards you and your feelings.
Mm.
And they'll begin living a life. I mean, maybe there are parents out there who their children are living the perfect life and everything about their life they love. Great. I need
Do
you
your
need to write a
Instagram
book and I
channel and
need to
leave us
read it.
alone.
Exactly. But for me, I have found that with my children, there were times when they would do things, make decisions, and make choices, or behave in certain ways, until I just said, you know what? I just don't like you. I love you, but I don't like you. I don't like the person that you're acting, the person you're becoming, the person that you are right now in this moment. Which is not to say that I don't love you unconditionally, but you know what? Yeah, I'm not there right now. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt. I'm angry. And when I was able to admit that to myself, because we live in this fantasy world where everything is supposed to be perfect all the time, and we always love our children despite when they do wrong or whatever. And you know what? If that's who you are, great, but that's absolutely not who I am.
Yeah, and
And so
it messes us up all the
it
throughout,
does. It does.
throughout with your spouse, with all kinds of other things in your life. You have this idea of how it's supposed to be perfectly done, like we see on social media, and then that friction with reality is really hard.
My wife says all the time now, one of the things that probably messes us up more than anything is expectations.
Yeah.
When we establish expectations of people, then that is the quickest route to disappointment. And I think the same thing happens with our children.
Oh, that's
We
really
have this perfect picture of
yeah.
of a perfect child in our mind, even though we weren't, by the way. And when they don't do that and they disappoint, then actually shame on us. Because when I learn to be at peace with my children is when I learn to allow them to live their own lives.
Right. Yeah, because they are not mini me's. They are
Mhm.
something else. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. My biggest thing with my children is I say to them, I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to give you the benefit of my wisdom. Once they actually past 18, became grown, became an adult, however you want to say it, when I would talk to them, I would always preface my comments by saying, do you want me to just listen, or do you want me to give you my input? And while I am a pastor, I try to make a point of never preaching at my children.
Mhm.
And so that being said, sometimes my children will say, Dad, I just need you to listen. And sometimes they'll say, no, I'd like your input. Okay, well, I'm going to give you my input, but just because I give it to you, you're not bound by it. And you don't, and you're not forced to accept it or to take it. But at the end of the day, for our children, just understanding that they're going to make up their own minds, they're going to make their own choices. And when they do, the only thing I say to my children the only thing I say to them is, I'm not going to make you pay for my decisions, so you will not make me pay for yours.
Mm.
And as long as we have that understanding, we're good. And for both of my children, neither one of them are walking the path that I charted for them, which is fine. They're walking their own path. They're happy with it, and they don't make me pay for their decisions. And for me, I don't know what more I could ask.
Yeah. Well, having happy kids I think that's the far greater test, is that if they end up happy and following their passions and not necessarily
Sure.
your passions or the passions that anybody else has
And
defined.
that's the true art of an engaged dad, that because an engaged dad understands exactly what you just said, Paul, that the most important thing is the happiness of your children, not the satisfaction of the parent.
Yeah. Well, it does get interesting when you're trying to teach them skills that you yourself believe would have been better for you. For example, like I grew up without a dad present, so I never learned how to play basketball. So I always
Okay.
wanted my son to learn how to play basketball, so you don't ever miss a pickup game where friends are together and they're having a great time and you have to sit on the side because you have no clue what you want to do. He didn't
Yeah.
like basketball. I
Yeah.
I tried to give him my life lesson of missing out, but he didn't want to do it. He played soccer and did track instead, and more power to him. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of funny. Now you do a lot of work also. The ministry really has a whole area dedicated to divorce, and
Yeah.
as a divorced dad yourself, and this sounds like something that's important to you. Navigating the divorce, you handle more the partner or the marriage part of the divorce, or is your divorce focused mostly on the family that needs to redevelop?
Yeah. I honestly don't know how you can compartmentalize divorce, right? My very first book was called Divorced But Still Dad. And it really said, I want to talk to you about the responsibility of a father during and after divorce, but we can't talk about that without talking about the marriage itself.
Mhm.
We can't talk about that without talking about how the marriage went into a ditch. We can't talk about that without talking about how do you choose the right mate for you. We can't talk about that without talking about how do you prepare yourself to be the right mate for someone else. We can't talk about that without talking about what it really means to be a man. And so all of it is is tied together in amazing ways. And then once you actually get to the point of talking about divorce, then you have to talk about how to do divorce in a way that is civil, how to do divorce in a way that always keeps the main thing as the focus. And in my mind, the main thing is the health, the mental and the physical health of your children, because that's your legacy. So you can get all tied up in, she's not getting my barbecue grill, I'm not giving her half of, I'm not giving her my artwork or whatever. But at the end of the day, it has to come back to your children, because they are the legacy that God gives every single one of us, and the promise of continuing our name. And so I have found that, in our divorce care that we do, that it can't be just about one thing. It has to be very holistic, and we have to look at it from all the angles, from the financial angle of it. We have to look at it from the physical angle of it. In the book, I talk about even how, as a dad who is divorced, how do you go about dating again with children? What does that look like? And in the chapter in my book, I call hide and seek. And I call it that because it's not always time to immediately show your children that you've jumped back out there and started dating. And now you start parading person after person after person in front of your children. That has an impact on their psyche. So I truly believe that when we are doing divorce, we truly look at it holistically. And my wife, who's also divorced, she and I were both married 17 years to different people. We did not know each other when we divorced, and she makes me tell that story so no one thinks she was the other woman. And then, about 3 years after each of us got divorced, we met one another. And so both of us bring very different views into kind of a therapy or a counseling for divorced people that really looks at divorce holistically. And unfortunately, I think one of the major areas that we have to look at divorce and understand is kind of the rejection and kind of the stigma that comes along with divorce that many people aren't ready for. And we talk about that a lot as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad you're doing that work because we all know that the lawyers aren't going to represent the kids in the process, much to the contrary. So, luckily there are more services out there. It's great that you've incorporated that actually into your church I would imagine it's not only for the members of your church, but you do
That's
outreach
correct.
to other people. You like, yeah, support
Yep.
support
Correct.
that mission. And then there are also obviously there have always been therapists working with marriage therapy, but more and more there are coaches, men
Yep.
coaches, women coaches working
Yep.
directly with divorce to try to help people through this before all that, the, like you say, the barbecue grill and
Exactly.
all those other
Exactly.
factors come in, because it rips apart any idea of taking care of the kids.
It does. It does.
And also what you said is really, I mean, I don't think a lot of people, certainly in the prior generations when we were just getting used to easier divorce, and there are a lot of sides to that issue. And I know there's some people now arguing against the freedom to have divorce, but it was a good thing for a lot of people who are stuck in really bad situations. But they need to keep on focusing on the kids and all that, because
Absolutely.
they're left behind in that struggle for just decoupling and then immediately recoupling.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree.
Yeah. So before I just want to make sure that everybody has your website, dadsoffaith.com, and then why don't you list the 5 books that you have, because they kind of they span a big variety of subjects.
They do. So the very first book that I wrote was Divorce But Still Dad: Faith Principles of the Responsibility of a Father During and After Divorce. I wrote that book while I was in the midst of my divorce, and I was trying to figure out how to do divorce in a way that honored God and honored my faith and kept my children in mind. And so I wrote the book. In the midst of writing that book, the second book, which is called The Love of a Father, Faith Principles of the Power of a Father's Love, it came out because in the midst of me writing the first book, it just really hit me so hard how so many men, and certainly all the ones that I know, just love our children. And a lot of people mistake the way we feel about their mother from the way we feel about our children. For a lot of men, what you see play out is not how they feel about their children, it's how they feel about the mother of the children and that relationship. The problem with that for a lot of the men, though, is they themselves don't know how to bifurcate the two. And so they allow too much kind of crossover and cross contamination into those relationships. But Love of a Father is a book that's really about how much men really love their children. I'll tell you a really cool thing about Love of a Father, though. I took 25 men. I sent out surveys to 25 fathers of different races, ethnicities, age groups, etc. And I said, would you mind filling out this survey talking about you as a father and your children and just fatherhood? 23 of the 25 men returned the survey in time enough for me to put it into the book. And so in the back of the book, you have just a number of 23 surveys from a variety of men talking about fatherhood. And it's interesting to see the different kinds of perspectives and viewpoints from all of that. And so I wrote that. And then I'm sitting at breakfast one morning with my wife, Leslie, and Leslie turns to me and says to me, it was 10 o'clock in the morning. She turns to me and says to me, you need to write a book about the power of an engaged dad, because I watch you with your children and there's something special about how you engage with them. Leslie did not grow up in a house with a father. And I said to her, and she said, you need to write a children's book about it so that even for children, they can understand the power of an engaged dad. You need to write a children's book. And I said to her,
a lot of kids don't have that model.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I don't know how to talk to kids. And she said, no, you need to write it. So I went upstairs to my office, and at 10 o'clock, by 6 o'clock, I had written the book. And not only the book, I had written actually a series, or I had developed a series, 12 different books, all about the power of an engaged dad. And so the very first book that came from that was a book called Pancake Dad, about a guy who gets up every Saturday morning and uses that time to just really bond with his children while they make pancakes and they serve it to mom in bed. That's mom's time to just relax. And so that was the first book that came out. The second book that came out is a book called Ice Cream Dad, about a dad who every Saturday afternoon, after all the chores are done, he takes his family out to get ice cream. And so both of those are done and available. The third one is called Pizza Dad, and that one is in illustration right now. And I'm really proud to say that my illustrator is just amazing. The artwork and the beauty of the illustrations are just gorgeous. It took us a long time to find her, but she's incredible. And then I've also written the next one, which is called Homework, which is called Date Night Dad, about a dad who makes sure that every week, I think it is, no, every month, that he and their mother, they have a date night, and the children help them get ready for that, and they celebrate that. And so there's a series of them. And just really quickly, in that series, what I really wanted to do is I really wanted to highlight five things. The first thing I wanted to highlight was, a thread in every single one of the books, is I wanted to highlight the power of an engaged dad versus just a present father. So in all the books, you'll find where the father is being intentional about being engaged. Yeah. The next thing I wanted to do was to talk about the power of how the importance of a father modeling for his son what it means to be a man. The third thread in there is the power of a father empowering his daughter, giving her that self-esteem and that validation that she needs, so that when she gets older in life, she understands she can do anything in the world and she does not have to be dealt with, any kind of a way. The fourth thread is treating their mother like a queen. It doesn't matter if you're with the children's mother or not. You can still treat her well, because you understand that half of your children are her and half of them are you. And if you treat the mother bad, in essence, you're treating half of your child bad. Yeah. And that's what you have to remember. And then the fourth thing is, is teaching your children the power of a higher power, a higher being. I don't call out the name, if you will, but I just think it's really important that people need to have something to believe in. I believe that men have to do a better job of helping give that hope and that faith to their families. And so those were those two books. So those were four books. And the fifth book is a book called Bad Dogs. Has nothing to do with fatherhood. It's a fictional book written about an African-American male who is from the North, who goes to the South to a military academy, and everything that he encountered while he was there. So it is a fictional book. It is loosely based on factual events. And that book took me 25 years to write. And more than anything else, when I completed the book, what stopped me from completing it was not knowing really the best way to wrap everything up. And I finally figured out that the best way to wrap everything up was to provide a message to people about the power of being a victor and not a victim. And so those are the five books that I have currently written, though I'm writing additional ones. I'm working on them right now, but that's where I am.
Man, there's so much in those series of books. I'd love to have like 5 more podcasts talking about a whole bunch of those themes. Really exciting, Ken. Really, I'm so impressed. I'd love to just do a podcast on how you've been so prolific, because I've got a few books in me myself, but they don't ever seem to get out on paper. So great to have you again. The website is dadsoffaith.com. Ken Gordon. A pleasure spending some time with you and sharing some of your thoughts. You've gotten my mind going on a few ideas that are building on the things that I've been thinking about as well.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll just say this to you, Paul, to your last comment, about me being prolific. I will tell you that I am really nothing more than a result of all of the powerful people that have poured into me. and that's all I am. And there have been amazing people. My wife is just an incredible person who has helped me become so much more of a better father, a better man. And I just truly believe that that we are a result of the prolific people that pour into us if we allow them to do so.
No, that's a great message. Gratitude is always a key value. All right, Paul Bance at GreatDad.com. You can find my coaching at GreatDad.com/coaching. Ken Gordon, a pleasure spending some time with you. Until next time.
My pleasure.